Welcome to the Encore Audio Archives YouTube channel. I'm Taper Dave, and this is my channel. I've uploaded hundreds of talks here that I've recorded at meetings in West LA, and I've also recorded conventions starting in 2013. I've got a bunch of those up. And Walt and Mary Murray, the original owners of Encore Audio Archives, started the company in the 80s, and Walt recorded Joe and Charlie's and a bunch of stuff down in Vista, California. My sobriety date is June 20th of 1994. I hope you find something you like, so please like and subscribe to my channel and comment down below. If you want to hear something that I don't have or that you don't see, I'll see that I get it. Anyways, take care and have a great day if you want to.
Hello everybody, my name is Richard Dunn and I'm an alcoholic. Hi, Richard. And my sobriety date is March 8 of 1993, and for that I'm very grateful. And I'm going to get this out of the way right now so I can be assured when I get a good night's sleep. I'd like to introduce my beautiful wife. Up. That's Miss Vonda Dunn, and she didn't know me anytime during my drinking. I met her after I had sobered up several years. But I'm supposed to tell you in a general way what it used to be like, what happened, and what it's like now. And if you hear any noise, it's not James's equipment, it's me shaking. And I'll just start off and try to take it from there. I don't know what happened. You know, I think they could have got a better speaker, but that's okay. So they chose me, and I'm grateful for whoever was responsible for that, because God works through me to do what I can do, because He worked through somebody one day to get me here. And I'll tell you a little bit about that. I remember when I first went to treatment, it was through the urging of a ex-wife of mine, and she called a bunch of places, and I really didn't go, but when she got on me too hard, I went there. And I remember kind of the second or first introduction I had to AA as a man sitting right over here. We went on one night to a panel discussion, and I don't know whether he was the lead person on that panel, but he took that panel and he ran with it, and he had me so damn scared. When I came out of there, I said, if that's what AA is about, I'm scared to death. And that's Howard. And I remember what went on that night, and I remember how nervous I was, but you know, it worked out for the best. I'm the youngest of 7 kids, and I'm not going to say I came from a dysfunctional family, and sometimes I get real emotional, people, but I'm not going to say my family was dysfunctional, but my father, like my cousin Billy, he was a Baptist deacon, Sunday school teacher. He done everything in the church but pastor, and sometimes he thought he was. My mother was a Sunday school teacher. She done all kind of stuff in the church, and so did I. That's just the way I was brought up. And the first time I can remember, I guess you would say, being kind of angry at anybody, anything, it was at my dad. My dad was verbally abusive to my mother. He never hit her. Some of the things he said to her, sometimes I wish he had. I can remember when I was a little kid, I was probably 4 or 5. I wasn't in school. My father was a farmer. He never worked a public job a day in his life. He farmed, and that's how he made his living. And he made a real good living. He's a big landowner. But I remember one day he took me and my brother down to a store that his brother-in-law owned. And he had a son in front of me, was named after him. And we walked up in that store, and I was trailing behind. And he took my brother up in there, and it was kind of like Andy Griffin when he went in Floyd's barbershop. He had his hand on his head, and he was rubbing his head, and he told the guys, now he said, this is my boy right here. And he looked back at me as I was climbing up the steps in the store, and he said, that's Savannah's boy back there. That was my mother. And you know, I got so mad at him. I mean, he disowned me in front of all those guys. That pissed me off. Excuse my English, but you know, I got mad at him right there. And I mean, I started to have resentments at him, and I didn't even know what it was. You know, I would listen at him, how he would talk to my mother and stuff, and it just grew and grew, and I never really liked my father till later on in life, and he came to me and he made amends, but rocked on, and my brother was named after my father. He was sickly all the time, and my dad always had to take him back and forth to the doctor. I mean, it seemed like every week, at least 2 or 3 times a month. And this doctor, he would always tell my dad, he said, there's nothing wrong with that boy, just take him back home and whoop him and make him work. You know, my dad wouldn't whoop him, but he sure would make him work. And I'll never forget one morning, it was raining so hard you couldn't see. And him and my mother jumped in the pickup truck and they left going to Bernice to take him back to the same doctor. And when they got there, this is the way it was told to me, that the doctor told him, he said, AV, he said, you need to rush this boy to Shreveport. It was Confederate Memorial Inn. He said he might live till he get there, and he might not. And thank you. And my brother went there, and he stayed there about 3.5 months. I never seen him. When I saw my brother again, he was stretched out in front of the pulpit in our church. He was dead. I immediately got mad at God. And from that day to this, there's nothing been more tragic in my life and made me more miserable and mad than that incident right there. And I was sober before I ever got over that, and I got it right with God. And I was raised by 4 girls. Well, you might as well say 3.5. So my baby sister, she never liked me. We always had fights. My oldest brother left home when I was 11 months old because he said my dad was so mean. He said he never would come back home. He said my dad always told him he never would be worth nothing. He told him he was going to steal. He told him he was going to be a good thief because he sure didn't want to live under his roof. And when I saw my oldest brother, I was almost married in my middle 20s. And I was full-blown alcoholic when I met him. And I'll never forget it. My dad was, I was stationed in Key West, Florida. My dad was on his deathbed, and they sent me to the airport to pick him up. And I said, well, who will I look for? I said, I don't know this guy. They said, well, look over there in the bed. And I looked, and they said, you're looking at him. And if you ever meet any of my sisters or my brother, and you want to know what they look like, just look up here at me. We all look alike. He told my mother if we didn't look like him, she had to find out who we belonged to, and they had to take care of him. So we all look like him. And I used to lay in bed at night, and I would pray and ask God to help me not to be like my father. I mean, I would go to sleep crying. And, you know, you need to be careful what you ask for and how you ask for it and what you do, because when I grew up, I was verbally and physically abusive to every woman I came in contact with. And it was a rough life, people. And I was on alcohol and other stuff at the time, and I mean, I've treated some people real bad. Not only women, men. I spent 13 years in the Army, and my alcoholism grew to leaps and bounds because you could get liquor free. I mean, not free, but you could get it cheap. And, you know, I've even went to the depths of stealing liquor. I would go to the liquor store with some friends of mine, and I would drive in an Army truck, and they would be in there talking and stealing liquor. But before my dad passed, me and him made up way before he passed. You know, he told me he was sorry for what he did, and he said I was a good son, and because he used to tell me all things, you should have been like Junior, you know, he would have lived, he would have been a preacher, you know, and this and that. And I just got tired one day. I said, if you want me to be somebody else, you make me somebody else, or you go get somebody else. I'm tired of it. And we had a fight one day, but I didn't get a chance to pass with one lick. And, you know, it was just tough. And I met a girl when she was 11 years old, and I was 13. And why she married me, I have the slightest idea, because you know what kind of guy I told you I was. But she married me, and it was a brutal marriage. And I wound up leaving her. I had one of the best jobs I ever had, and I used to wish for that job back. But, you know, I came in the program and I learned that I don't have to wish for things, because if I have a higher power like I have now, things only come better, at least for me. I can only tell you about Richard Dunn. I can't tell you about nobody else in this room and nobody else in AA. But things get better, you know. And I brutalized her life. And I wound up leaving her, leaving that job, going to another state. And that's how I wound up in the military. I wanted to come back to her, and I didn't have a job at the time, so I joined the military. And I spent 13 years in the Army. And I done 8 years active duty, and the rest I done in the reserves. And I had enlisted, and I had enough time on that one enlistment that I could have retired. but my alcoholism took over and told me that they didn't need me. And I'm not glad, but that was during the time of the Iraq invasion. And as scary as I am, I had no place being over there. But, you know, me and her eventually broke up, and I was, but before that, I'll back up. I remember I came home on Thanksgiving, and the Red Cross had contacted me and told me my dad was sick and he was going to have surgery. And they lied to me. They said he just had a knot on his neck and that it was okay and I didn't need to come home. But I took leave, and me and my wife came home for Thanksgiving, and I knew something was wrong when I pulled up the road to our house. My dad, like I said, he owned a bunch of land, and I looked around and everything was in grass. And that, I mean, he hated grass, he hated weeds, and he didn't come out of the house. And when I went into his bedroom, he was sitting back there by a heater in his rocking chair. And he was a tall man, much taller than me, and he was bigger. And he was sitting there with his head down. And he was on his way to wherever his Heavenly Father was going to send him. And I left, and I went back to where I was stationed at, and I left my wife there. And I came back home. I had to put in to go overseas, a mistake I made. And when I came back home, my father was in the hospital, and he was dying. And he told the doctors right over here at Lincoln Journal, he told the doctors he wanted to die at home. And while he was in the hospital, he looked up at me, and he said, I want you to stay in the hospital with me. I don't want anybody else. And I mind you, I wasn't in the program then. And he told my mother, he said, Savannah, go home. And that stinking thinking kicked in, and I leaned over, and my beard was just a little bit long, and I bent over, and I said, do you know who I am? He said, yes. And they called me Dick. He said, that's you, Dick. And that alcoholic thinking said, yeah, stay with him. Said, you can get him back now. Said, this is your chance. But I didn't. And my mom went home, and I stayed with him. And the only way I could stay in the room with that man at night is I had to walk down the side street over here, Mill Street, and I had to get totally blasted to stay with him because he moaned and groaned all night. He had cancer down in here, and it was eating him up. And he told me, he said, son, please don't let the nurses come in here and stick me. He said, I'm so tired of getting stuck with that morphine. And he would have me to rub his butt where they would shoot him with alcohol pads, and I would. And he came home. They sent him home to die. And me and my wife was out there on the side of the house one day with a bunch of friends, and we were getting loaded. And my dad got so sick they had to take him back over here to the hospital. And I can remember when the ambulance came and they put him on the stretcher and they were bringing him out. And my wife looked at him, and she looked at me, and she told me, she said, I wish that was you. And I'm not going to say what I called her because it's not appropriate. But I told her that, and I continued to do what I was doing. And my father went on, and anyway, he came back home in about 3 days, and he passed. And she told me, she said, when you go overseas, I'm through with you. And she was true to her word. My father died. I took an extension, and we buried him, and I headed out. And I sent her to school. She finished school at Grambling State, and I paid for it. And while I was over there, I can remember it like it was today. I had like a month left, and I went to my mailbox. It was on the 15th of that month. There was 2 letters in there. One was a blue envelope, which was my 15th of the month check, and the other one was a letter from her telling me where I could go. And I was almost there. And you know, when you're in a foreign country, and the foreigners talk about you so bad, I mean, you're doing things so bad that, you know, they talk about you. You're in bad shape. And I remember I had like a little while left before I came home, and I went one day and I looked in the mirror at myself, and I knew what kind of mother I had left back home. And I said, if I go back home, and she always called me her baby. I said, if I go back home looking like this, what is she going to think of her baby? I got up that next morning, I went to the doctor, and I told myself, I said, I'm quitting everything. Because I was doing some hard, harsh stuff. And the doctor checked me out, and he said, you're okay for now. And I went back, and I think I drank 1 beer after I made that doctor's visit. And I came on back home, and true enough, she had left me. And I came, and I stayed with my mother. And I got shipped out to another place. And I've been in jail more times overseas in foreign countries than I have here in the United States. And they used to call me the jailhouse lawyer because I got in trouble a lot in the Army. I mean, from basic training on up, I got in trouble. But if you would listen to me, you were destined to let me go. I would talk you out of it. But anyway, I rocked on, and I wound up overseas again, and I met my second wife. And when I met her, she had about 6 months left in service, and I didn't know I was going to marry her, but she got out of the service, and she came back to Europe to marry me. And before I married her, just like my first wife, I done her. Ooh. And, you know, she had went home, came back over there. Her father didn't want her to come. She came back and stayed with me and married me. And I beat her and all kind of stuff, and turned around, and I sneaked out of Germany about 2 o'clock one morning. I left her over there. It's not funny. But when they found out she was, that I had left, they told her she had to leave. So she came home to me, and the WWF was on again. You know, we were fighting and stuff. And before I left, my mother had met a man, and she called me and said, "Son, you think I should marry her?" I said, "Well, I can't marry you because some of my brothers, my brother and my sisters didn't want her to marry her." I said, "I can't marry you. If you're happy, go for it." And she married, and she gave me the home she was living in. And me and my wife stayed there for a few months, and we fought and done. And finally she left. And as usual, I didn't have a problem finding another woman. So, you know, I found another one. But my mother didn't make it in that marriage. And by that time, we didn't realize it. She was coming down with Alzheimer's. And that was the love of my life, my mother. And she wound up in Oakland, California, and she wound up totally blind. And I used to go to see my mother, and I couldn't stand to be around her because I was her pride and joy. She died at age 89. And out of all her kids, she would rant and rave and curse and do everything, but she could talk to me on the phone, and she knew I was her baby. And if they talked about me, she said, "Don't talk about my baby." I mean, she never got harsh or hostile with me. And I used to go to see her, and I couldn't stand it. I would cry, and I would go to church, and they would sing the songs that they would act, that she sing, and they would ask me about my mother, and I would have to get up and leave church. And I just couldn't take it. And I came back, and the wife I had at the time, she said, "You need help." I said, "Like I don't know it, but I'm not getting it." So, but anyway, she called some places. I was drawing Social Security Disability at the time, and she called 2 places. She said, "You can go to the VA since you're a veteran, or you can go to Woodland Hills." And I didn't go. I said, "Give me a few days, baby." And the 3rd of July, 1991, she told me, said, "Okay, come back here with no money and drunk." Say, "You're out." And I wasn't married to her then, but she was an ex-cop up at Grambling, and I knew that if she chose to, she would catch me right. She could whoop me. So I'm not a dummy. So that night about 9:30, and $1,000 short of what I had, I realized that I might need to get some gas and take a ride to Shreveport. And I did, and I drove over to the VA hospital in Shreveport. And I got there, and you talking about a liar. You know, they say, I can speak for me, I'm only talking about Richard. Con artist, manipulator, liar, thief. I lied to that man so, and, you know, he really wasn't going to take me in. But finally, something I said, I guess, clicked, and he told me he would start the paperwork to admit me. And he did. And I told him, he said, "What's your problem?" I said, "My heart is racing fast, and I have a headache." And so he took me down to admissions. And later on, they told him what happened. He came back by a room, and he looked at me, and he said, "You lied to me." He said, "You told me this." And he said, "I just found out." I said, "Look, man, if you was doing what I was doing," I said, "Go on." I knew I was in then. So they kept me in there for 7 days, 8. And it come time for me to go. And they told me, "So we have a 28-day program upstairs, Mr. Don. If you choose to, you can come back in 28 days. When we call you, you can come back for the 28-day program." I said, "Sure." So I went home, and it took them 3 weeks to call me. And I was ready to go back so I could get this over. You know, I was just trying to prove a point to this woman that I was, you know, okay. And I went back in 3 weeks when they called me. And one day they called me, and I wasn't at home. And you talking about mad. I said, "Dog, I could have had this over with." But anyway, I went on back. And I remember some things about that. The only thing I remember about that is they had a guy come in on Saturdays, and he'd take a step, 1 step that day, and he would go thoroughly through that step. And I would walk around the VA. I'm an avid exerciser sometime, and I'd walk around and I let in my head go, you know, what he had said on that step, but nothing really stuck with me. And when my 28 days was up, they kept me about 3 or 4 days later. I have scoliosis, and they were looking all into that. But anyway, I came home, and at night when I got home, it was on. You know, I sat there with her, and she used to like to do some things, and I did too, but I liked the alcohol better. And, you know, we've had trips like the police coming out, and, you know, I'd reach up under the couch and get her a little pan with a little tobacco and stuff in, and I said, you ain't taking me nowhere, you know, you take her, and stuff like that, you know, and all that kind of stuff. But I had no intentions of sobering up, and 5 months later, I was back in the same shape that I was in. Matter of fact, much worse. And she told me, she said, I want you to go down to Woodland Hills and talk to this guy. I said, give me a few days, baby. I think it was 3 days. I went down there and I talked to a guy. He was real young. And I, yeah. Just lying to him. If you had a wife like this, you know, and I had a sick uncle who had a stroke, I said, if you had to do this, man, you. He just sat up there and finally, he said, Mr. Dunn, do you want help? And little did I know that I was telling him the honest to God truth as best I had probably told in years. I said, I'll see you in 2 or 3 days. I came back home, and I was self-employed. And it was kind of drizzling rain that night, and my business folded. I used to have a hot check writing business. It folded that night, and I found out, you know, it was some guys in some uniforms, you know, they were kind of looking for me. So I said, you know, I better take a trip down Highway 80 East. So I went on back and I admitted myself in the Woodland Hills, and I felt different, and it was a big, larger group than I was in at the VA. And, you know, there was a lady coming there, and I'm not going to call her name, but she'll probably be at our convention because I've only missed her for 2 years, 1 year since this convention started. And she came in there and she looked at me and she said, will you pray for me? I said, Lord, how sick can you be? You know, I can pray even when I'm real drunk or whatever, but I said, you know, people could see stuff in me that I couldn't see in myself. So I said to myself, if you want this curse, come on. I took her to her room, got on my knees, and I said one of them good Baptist backdoor prayers for her. And, you know, like I say, I see her every year at the convention, and she thanks me, you know. And anyway, I stayed there, and I remember coming to the room, and they said, you got to do steps 1 through 5 before you leave. I said, I said, I got a blue and white card. I said, as soon as it run out, 28 days or 30, I said, I'm out of here. You know, I said, you're not going to be able to hold me any longer. You know, and I know today that it was God doing for me what I couldn't do for myself. Something came over me that made me want to do the step work that they asked me. I don't know what it was. But then again, that old stinking thinking kicked back in, and I started calling people that I knew I could get over on, that I could manipulate, you know. God, again, I couldn't get any of them. You know, they wouldn't even answer the messages that I left. I said, you know, what kind of stuff is this? So I wound up getting a guy there in the treatment center whom I despised. I told him he thought he owned Woodland Hills. And I done a 5th step with him when it came time. And, you know, it was a kind of relief. And I said, man, you know, this feel okay, you know, feel okay. So I went on and I left Woodland Hills, and I'll never forget, that was February 13th of 1992. And I came through that door there. I said, well, I'm coming home tonight, and I'm going to impress this woman. I'm going to go to a meeting on my own, not in that wagon that they take you in. And I got home, and I came to a meeting, and I'll never forget. I parked over there, kind of by the tree, and I got out, and I started to I met an old guy out there. He looked like he was barely making it, and he introduced himself, and I introduced myself, and he welcomed me and told me to come on in, and I said, okay, and I got to the door, and he was kind of catching up to me behind me, and he's gone now, so I can use his name. His name was Joe Gage, and I opened up this door, and I looked up in here, and I said, oh, Lord, I said, and I looked back, and he was so close to me that I said, dog, and what I said, I said, look, I don't see nothing here but white people. I said, I can't go in here. And I looked back at him, and I said, if I run over this old white man, I said, I'm sure going to jail. So I came on up in here, and I sit somewhere, I think, at the 3rd table, and he sit there by me. And he sit there like this, and he had his head down, and I couldn't tell you but one thing about that meeting tonight. I saw something in this meeting that I wanted, and I went after it after the meeting. I didn't get it, but I did get drunk. I wound up going home about 11 o'clock with some kind of cock and bull lie that I told my wife at the time. And I never went back to treatment, but I did wind up in a mental institution in the Conway. I think it was the 4th floor, whatever you call it. I threatened to kill some prominent people here in Ruston. You know, when you get in them rages and you get mad at your wife and, you know, things just not going your way, you know, I get to flapping off at the mouth, and the wrong people got wind of it. So she took me to Woodland Hills to talk to some people, and they wrote a nice letter, and they said in that letter that if I did not show up at whatever that nut house was there in E.A. Conway, that whoever was responsible for me not going there would be apprehended by the Ouachita Parish Sheriff's Office, and I would too. And to show you how sick or drunk I was, my wife was walking out and we was going to the car, and I think it was my sister with her. And she got to read, she said, baby, said, I'm not taking you over there. She said, listen to what this letter said. And she started reading that letter to me, and I turned around, and she had me by the arm. I turned around, and I ran from her, and I ran back up into that building. I said, she's not taking me. She's not taking me. Y'all got to do something with her. Now, you tell me if I had good sense. And he looked at her. He said, ma'am, he said, you must take him. And you know, if she would have went on, and if I would have let her continue, and she would have read the end of that letter, I might would have listened to her, because at the end of that letter, it said, which I didn't find out till I got up into that ward, that when I got there, I was to be strapped to the bed. I didn't get strapped to the bed, but they put me in a room with a man who had jumped off the Ouachita River in Arkansas who was strapped to the bed. So I got a first-hand look at how it feels not being able to go to the bathroom on your own. But they did give me some pills that made me have to crawl to the bathroom. Anybody in here familiar with medical terms, if you know what 1,000 milligram Elavil is, you know. And they told me, say, when you get out of here and you go to the drugstore, they're going to look at you like you're crazy, because you're going to have to get this prescription filled. And that doctor, which was an OB doctor, I was mad about that. Here I am up here in an alcohol nut ward, and an OB doctor's in charge. You know, I'm not having a baby, but anyway. You know, I said, what am I going to do? And she got my soon-to-be wife at the time up there, and she told her, said, I'm going to send him to Pineville and forget where I put him. Man, what have you got yourself into? God is a good God, because my sister told me that my wife, soon-to-be wife, she came home that night, and she sat up all night, and she cried, and she looked in the phone book. She called different places, and she found a young man in Shreveport, an attorney by the name of Paul Young. He came back down there the next day, and he called me in there, and he talked to me. And he said, did you really want to kill somebody? I said, no. He said, well, if you had the chance. I said, no, sir. And so that old OB doctor thought she had him. She said, he needs to see a psychiatrist before he leaves, and our psychiatrist only comes once a week, and he's already been. He said, I have a friend across the street. And he whispered in my ear and told me what to say when I got over there. And I wish y'all could have seen me. I looked a hot mess. I put on a house coat and hair everywhere, and I got into that ambulance, and I rode across the street. I'll never forget his name. He was Dr. Bishop. He's in the mental health center over there across the street from E.A. Conway at the time. And I went in there, and he asked me the same questions. Everything was, no, I'm not going to kill him. No, I don't want to kill anybody. I went back, and I was discharged. And you think what I had just been through would be enough to sober up. I was trying to get them to stop at places on the way home. They wouldn't. I came on home. I had been through 2 treatment centers and a nut house, and I never went back to another treatment center, but I got to coming up in here. And I remember back when I was at Woodland Hills, they took us out in that nut wagon one night to a meeting. I think it was, Don, what was that group you and Buster used to do big book study at? New Freedom. I would have rather been locked up in a cell for an hour. I don't smoke cigarettes. Some kinds I do, but I mean, there was so much smoke in there, but I remember him and Buster up there doing the big book. I said, oh my God, no. So anyway, I went on back, and I I remember that. And I remember some of the things they said that night. It made sense at the time because I was locked down. But I went on back and I kept coming here. And I would get 2 months, 3 months. Had a sponsor, didn't use him, come to meetings. And there's a lady sitting in here now, she said she thought I knew something. She said, Richard talked like he was real smart, but she didn't know I was good at that stuff. You know? The pastor of our church, well, ex-pastor, he said, if you would listen to my daddy, he said, Brother A.V. would talk a possum out of a tree if if he would listen at him. And I was his baby boy, and I was the same way. But I come up in here, like I say, and I would get a few months, and I'd go back out. And I came in here with the worst attitude that anybody could imagine. And when I came in here, I think I said this at a meeting a couple of Sunday nights ago. When I came in here, the 2 words that I didn't want to hear that my parents had preached to me, they used to tell me that, boy, I'm kind of a loner, and I was. They said, you can't get along in this world by yourself. You always need someone. You can't do it alone. And when I came in here, that meeting, the first 2 words I heard was God, whom I was mad at for letting my brother die, and people. I thought God had a warrant out for me, and he's just waiting to locate me, and I was going to be, Then I came in here, and there was an old lady in here. She's gone now. Mary Chartel. She used to make me so sick. I mean, and another gentleman sitting over there, Joe Reed. If I could have, I would have just grabbed him, and like he told me one night, and I just shook him out. I mean, he would sit back there at that table at those closed meetings on Tuesday nights, and he would just talk about me. And he would say, I don't have to go back out because Richard up there, he goes back out, and he said, look at him. He said, did it look like he's having fun to you? And I said, why? And I was scared to say something to him. I said, why is him and Mary picking on me? And then Mr. Selma, he was sitting down at the end. He never talked about me, per se, like Joe did. And Joe wasn't talking about me. I understand now, and I'll explain later. But Mr. Selma was talking about how good his life was. And then Ed Roth, he would come along and he'd tell you about how he walked across Europe, got shot in the butt, and how good life was to him. I said, I don't want to hear this crap. And I told myself, I said, how is coming in this room, sitting up here for an hour, talking about all this junk, gonna help me stay sober? I said, don't make sense. But as one of my former sponsors once told me, he said, he found out who the fool was, and the fool was talking. And that was the case with me. I was the fool. I didn't know nothing. And I have been absolutely told one time that I didn't know nothing, I didn't have nothing to give, so shut up and listen. They told me that it was my best thinking that got me in this room, and I needed to hush. I needed to let somebody else do my thinking. I would get mad. I was offended. You don't know me. How can you tell me this? You don't know nothing about me. But they did. Oh, they did. So I rocked on, getting mad at Joe and them and Miss Mary and all of them for a while. And, it's just like going down a road where there's construction. Certain parts of it is smooth because they're working on it, but if you get on down there where they're tearing it up, it'll get rough. And that's what happened to old poor Richard. Like old Joe used to say, old poor Richard, and I kept pouring old Richard another drink. And life kept getting rougher. I can remember Christmas, old poor Richard had got put out. Didn't have money to call home. I lived over here on Groveland from behind Christian Funeral Home. Walked down here to the Easy Mart on 167 South. Made a collect call home to ask if I could come home for Christmas to see my daughter. And I don't have to tell y'all what the answer was. And I'm not going to say what I call her, but I said the nerve of that thing. My sister and my brother-in-law are sitting up in my house that I paid for, and I can't go there. But I took my tail and went on back down to the low, as they call it. Spent Christmas Eve down there lonely and alone. And I've always been a clean, well-dressed guy, well-groomed. But it's been times that I've come in here. When you smell your own self, you getting bad. When you smell yourself and you get in a cab and the cab driver turn his nose up at you, it's getting bad. But I really wasn't ready to quit. I used to, when I was on disability, when I quit drawing, I was getting $1,000, over $1,000 a month. I used to go to the post office and I would open that box up And at that time, the mail would be in by 8:30, and I would lean up in that window. And when they stuck that blue envelope through there, they could have shoved my mother through there, and I would have left her because I was getting that check and I was gone. And by noontime, I would be broke because I like to party and I would like to get everybody involved. If you ever passed me on the road in my car, you would see heads everywhere because I'd be on the back laying out and somebody else driving. And I had a bad habit. I used to see stuff. And the main thing I would see was that heavy-set ex-wife of mine. And when I saw her, whether it was 12 o'clock at night or 12 o'clock in the day, whether I had a tank of gas or that little, I was going to mash on it. And hey, I'd be driving with my knees a lot of time, and I just let it go. But you know, it came to that point where that road I was telling you about got rough, and I had 3 months sober one time, and I was so dry, wasn't doing nothing, just going to meetings, trying to impress my wife. I would take her lunch to work. She worked at Sally's, and here you go, see me at 12 o'clock. I'd go in there with this tray and boy, them ladies, and I said, ooh, I wish I had a husband like that. And when I turned my back, I could hear her saying things about me. You just don't know that, you know what. You know, and she was right. And she was right. She was telling the truth. But you know, I had those 3 months sober, and I'll never forget, she came home one evening. I had been home all day, cleaning, cooking, preparing a meal for her. And she came in that evening, and I said, honey, I said, get dinner ready, and, you know, I'm going to go uptown to see a lawyer and about some family business. And I said, I'll be back, and me and you have dinner. Because by that time, she had, I can't have kids naturally, so we had adopted a daughter. And I said, we all sit down and have dinner. And I went uptown, and I got there. I was in the lane to go straight across there at Cartesians. And when the light went green, no, I was in the right turn lane, take that back. And when the light turned green, I kept straight across. Didn't even look back. I had $60 in my pocket. I was on fire. You hear me? And I kept on down. And that was the Friday. It was March the 6th, 1993, the eve of destruction. Richard Dunn was fixing to go down again. And I went on to an old hangout, and about dark, and when I get to drinking and doing what I do, I get hot. And I was upstairs in this house. I was just prancing and had the window up looking. I was narrating and in nothing but my underwear. And I looked down there, and what did I see? I saw Big Bertha down there. I had left home in her car. And she came out there, and I scuffled around. I found my pants. And I'm not going to say what I called her, but I told the guy, I said, take her them keys. And he took them down there, and about 30 minutes later, she came back with my car and everything packed in it. But little old broad, no, I had saved up $400. I had an inside jacket. I found that $400. This was Friday night. Saturday evening, I couldn't buy you a glass of air. And Sunday morning, I woke up. No, Saturday evening, I got there so belligerent, they locked me in a room upstairs, and I kept trying to hide. I was crawling because I could hear people. I saw Joe, and I saw Jim Hester, Miss Mary, and I saw everybody. Every time I would try to duck under something, I would hear him say, there he is. I had on an old black ball cap, and I took it and I threw it up. So finally I wound up laying across the bed, passing out. But before I passed out, I heard something. I heard my daughter cry out. My daughter's a daddy's baby. She said, Mama, I want my daddy. And she said, baby, she said, your daddy's sick. I said, oh, Lord, you telling the truth, baby. But I passed out on that bed, and when I woke up, little did I know my life was going to start to change, because I went downstairs and I laid down on the couch. And that Sunday morning, I got up and I called my wife. And that manipulation technique didn't work. The crying didn't work. She didn't want nothing to do with me. And I called the lady that I had knew. My father used to sell vegetables, and then that lady right there, her father used to work at Service Cleaners, and they were good friends of the family. And I called her. I don't know how I got in touch with her, because the little pea brain that I had at the time was not operational. And I asked her, would she please come give me a ride out of Hellville? And when she came to get me, I had drug all my clothes out. And I didn't have a car at the time. And when she came up the road to pick me up, she did not see me. And oh God, I started to cry. And she turned around, and she didn't have no problem seeing me the next time, because I was going to meet her. she met me and she took me to her house, and I went to her house and I took over. Her and her kids were getting ready to go to church, and I went in there and I got in the shower, and I made sure I heard that door close. They were going to church. And when they left and went to church, I went through their kitchen. I don't know, it was probably a few days before they could find something to eat, because I hadn't ate since that Friday when I left home. I never went back to that meal, but anyway, and I just went in the bedroom there and I locked up. And the only time I came out was to go to the bathroom, and I'd done that for 2 or 3 days. And I finally called my sister in Missouri and I asked her, she said, we're not sending you any money, but they sent me a bus ticket. Thursday evening at 2:45, I caught the Greyhound from Ruston headed to St. Louis, the most loneliest trip of my life. And I was so disgusted, I called my brother in some town, I think it was O'Fallon. I told him to come get me. I couldn't take it anymore. And he come got me, and I went to their house, and I stayed there for like 3 weeks reading the Bible, reading the big book, reading the 12 and 12. And I finally needed help. And I got in the phone book, and I called the treatment center. And they asked me where I was located, and I told them. They directed me to a meeting. And my brother-in-law worked at GM, and he had 2 cars. He let me use one to go to a meeting. But after I got to the meeting, I found out it was just like this Ruston group. No black folks in St. Louis wanted to sober up that time because I was there. But that's not a problem with me. I don't get the wrong understanding on that. I grew up in the 60s during integration, and I used to have to fight just to sit out in class sometime. But that's not a problem. But I went there, and after a week going to that meeting, I didn't have to use my brother-in-law's car anymore. They would come pick me up, take me to meetings. I had 4 months sober, and this guy who was just like me, he was taking me around St. Louis, getting me to talk at meetings. What the heck he was doing, I have no idea. And I got about 5 months, and I caught that bus, and I came back to Ruston, and my wife had told me she was going to take off work, and got back home. She stayed home with me 45 minutes, and she went back to work, and I went through the roof. But I got to thinking about those meetings, because I remember when I caught that bus going to St. Louis, Joe Gage met me there, and my wife had just left in front of Joe, and he hugged my neck, and he told me, he said, Richard, don't drink and go to meetings. He said, I don't condone you going to St. Louis, because it seemed like what you call it, geographical change. And I said to myself, I ain't got nowhere to stay. You gonna let me stay with you? But anyway, I went on, and I used to call Joe on occasions. And I remember he told me, he said, look what you're putting her through. And Joe hugged my neck before I got on that bus, and I looked him in the eyes, and he looked me in the eyes. I said, Joe, why do you mess with me? I said, I'm a liar, I'm a thief. And I said, I just do people wrong. He said, you're a human being. And he said, God loves you. And he said, so do I. And I thought deep down, I said, my wife just left here, and I begged her to let me come back home. And she wouldn't, and she sure enough didn't tell me she loved me. And anyway, I landed back in Ruston, and I got to come to these meetings, and I got with that sponsor at the time, and, things started to look up, and I had no idea that this was going to be it for me. I'll never forget, I had 9 months sober, and I was sitting down there about where Paul is sitting now. It was a Sunday night, and I had talked to Mr. Joe about some issues that were going on with me that I was having problems with, and he gave me some suggestions, and I started to follow them. And things were working out, and that Sunday night, when I was sitting about where Paul was sitting, a revelation of something came to me. I can't say it was God talking or whatever, I don't know, but anyway, something just came over me and told me that problem that you talked to your sponsor about, you can throw it out the window, everything's okay now. I never had that problem with my wife again. And I think I had 8 years sober, and we couldn't get along anymore. It was a bitter divorce, bitter. She didn't show up in court, but the things that led up to it, we meet up in town where she would follow me, and she would come to my job and stuff like that, and it was real bad. And I didn't have to drink over it. We separated, divorced. I had to pay child support for a child, and I couldn't have children. I didn't get drunk over that. And about 2 years, I didn't have to pay child support anymore. And she really didn't like me. I thought the child had turned her back on me. I found out that wasn't true. And I remember, I think I had eight years too. I called Joe one Saturday night back over there by that first couch, and I told him how I felt about him when I first come in here and what I thought about him. And, and he told me, he said, Richard, he grabbed me and he said, I love you, man. He said, I saw you killing yourself. He said, I just wish I could have took you and shook you and shook off on you what I had. He said, but I couldn't do it. He said, that was the only way I know to make it work. And he said, look at you today. He said, you're sober. And I saw Joe in a different light that night, and I've seen him in a different light ever since. And like I say, I can only speak for Richard. Everybody see everybody different, and I see him like I want to see him. And that's all about me and my God. Because like I said, when I came in here, I had that Baptist God, and I was scared of him. Because my mom and daddy used to tell me, if you do this, God's going to get you. If you do that, the devil going to get you. But you people told me I could have a God of my understanding. And in working those 12 steps, you know, I found out who I was. I'm an okay guy. I just got some bad ways. You know, even though I stole from a man, which was my uncle, on his dying bed, I robbed him of his bank account. I was taking care of him. I wasn't sober. And he told me before he died that he wasn't okay with what I did. But he told me, he said, I want you to get some help for yourself, boy. He said, I know what you was doing. And I know he's looking down on me tonight. I know him and my mother both. I was sober when my mother died. When my uncle died, I wasn't. And I know he's looking down on me, and I know he knows that I'm sober. I have to work those steps every day. And I get better each day as time goes by. You know, making amends. You done me wrong. I don't care. It makes me feel good when I do that. You know, when I got down to 4 and 5 and I done that inventory like I said, I didn't want to look at Richard because I had done some things to some people that I didn't want to think about if I was locked up in a dark room by myself. I didn't want to think about them. But when you do what it says up there, you admit them to God, and another person, you get okay with it. And around here they call it house cleaning. Once I cleaned my house, you know, I started to feel okay. And today, my wife that I have now, I met her. I started to work where I'm at in 95, and I met her. And that's all I'm going to say about that. And we've had our ups and downs. And might be at a down time now, but she's here. And she's been good to me. And I've been bad to her. She's been bad to me, and vice versa. And at one time, I owned a home and 3 cars. When I came into AA, I had little more than a paper bag and what was in it, and it was dirty. And I say that to say this, those are material things, but if I would have been the alcoholic practicing that I was, I wouldn't have had anything. Today, I have more than I ever had in my life. And the God of my understanding is blessing me with more each day. And I always say it feels good to feel good. If you're new here tonight, you need to get you a sponsor. You know, some people, I've tried to sponsor a lot of people, you know, and they always tell me they don't have any problems. You know, I'm okay with that. I can't shake nothing out of you. And my first real sponsor, which was Joe Gage, always told me, he said, I'm not going to be coming to you. He said, if I got what you want, you're going to come to me. I got 2 guys that I try to sponsor, and they both stay in touch with me pretty regular. I have more than that, but those 2 stay in touch. And I'm okay with that. You know, when I can be okay with Richard, that's all I ever wanted. You know, I look back on my life, and I don't dwell on it. When I was in the military, I belonged to a lot of different organizations, gang-related things. And I've committed some crimes overseas and in the United States that if I would have been convicted, I wouldn't have been standing here tonight. I mean, serious crimes, not murder, but right next door to it. And I didn't commit them, but I was accused of them because I was doing the wrong thing and I was in the wrong place. And I'm here tonight. You know, God kept me here for a reason. You know, God blessed me with gifts. He blessed me with my wife. He blessed us with a home. He blessed me with a job. I've been there since 95. I almost got run off a lot of times, but I'm still there. And I'm there for a reason. I've had the opportunity to go to more high-paying jobs in different places. I could have been working at the glass plant. I could have been working at another one of the mills there in Simsbury, but I chose the profession where I am because I love old people. I work at a nursing home. And if you go through that nursing home, I went in the office today, and I think we have 122 people on the roll, and the majority of them are women. And you might find one old woman in that building that might would have something to say about me, and it's because of her mind. But the rest of them will tell you, I can hear them talking about me to their family. He's a good guy. I take our time with them. I let them know somebody loves them, because some of them, they never see their family, they never see anybody. And I had a mother, and I had a father, and I loved it. And, you know, some of them take the place of them. Some of them I call them mom, you know. And if I never would have came to AA, and I never would have discovered the God of my understanding, I wouldn't be standing here tonight. I wouldn't have that love in my heart. And I most certainly wouldn't have my beautiful wife, because I would have been unrun her away. Because, see, that's my game plan. Don't get close to me. And I've had lots of women to tell me, when I start getting close to you, you change into somebody else. I don't want you to get to know me. I don't want you to know me. You're getting too close. But in here, I've learned to love people. I know what true love is today. I know what it is to have true friends. And it feels good to have true friends. And I think of all the money that I threw away drinking, trying to be happy. You know, and all I had to do was come in here and share a few minutes. And if I didn't want to, I didn't have to share. Put $1 in the basket if I had it. If I didn't have it, let the basket go by. Today, I know how to look around when I go in places. I know how to respect people. And I'm an avid churchgoer. But this is where I found the God of my understanding, in this very room right here. And I am loyal to this group for one reason. I switched and I went over to town and they started smoking too much, and I came back. And no matter what happens, hell or high water, I think when I go, I'll be right here, because I have a lot of memories here. This is where I sobered up. I used to come there at that table, back table right there at a lot of noon meetings, smelling so bad I couldn't stand myself. My lips burn up. I wouldn't smile. They would be laughing and I would drop my head. You know, there were people here who would tell me after a bad relapse, Richard, we're glad to see you. Welcome back. We've been waiting on you. I remember stuff like that. See, I know what it's like to be down. I know what it's like to be on the bottom. But today I know what it's like to be on top. You know, I met some good people here, some good friends. I met good friends all over in AA. But I know I had a good friend in particular. He didn't know that I cared that much about him. He had a lot of years and he went back out. And I missed him. And I never thought that God would put me and him in touch like he did. And when he came back in, me and him had the opportunity to ride together on Friday nights going to the prison. And boy, have we had a ball, you know, laughing and talking, you know. And it feels good to love, and it feels good to be loved, you know. And it feels good when I lay my head on my pillow at night and I've gotten on my knees and I've thanked God for being sober that day, you know, and I can honestly thank him, you know, because I used to stay messed up so much. It was one year I come to get my chip and I didn't know if I had been sober all that time. But, you know, God revealed to me that I had, and, you know, that's a good feeling. And, you know, everything I know about living today, I learned it in rooms like this. You know, I see people uptown and everywhere, like at my work from AA. You know, they're glad to see me and I'm glad to see them. You know, and, you know I'm talking like I live a storybook life. That's not so. Me and my wife, we still have arguments. I still get mad at coworkers. I still get upset and all that stuff. But today I have a way to handle it. Before I went out and drank, I got mad. I talked about you. And, you know, sometimes I do that today. But, you know, today, that's the guideline for my life right there. You know, when I do that, I have to go back and I make amends to those people. Because if I don't, I'm not going to be okay with me. And when I do that, and, you know, one person told me, I got mad at a coworker a while back, and I said some choice words to him. And, you know, I hadn't even went out the door of the building, gone out to the maintenance building, and I found myself, said, you were wrong. And I went back to him, and I told him that I was wrong. And they told me, said, I'll forgive you, but I won't forget it. I'm okay with that. I've done what the God of my understanding, the program of Alcoholics Anonymous asked me to do. And that's all that's required of me today. And like I said, all I have to do today is listen to my sponsor, come to meetings, and practice these steps. And one old saying, old coon in here, he said, we have 12 twos that'll fit any nut. And I am a nut. and I keep those tools on me, and I work with them. And I wouldn't have it no other way. I'll say this and I'll close. If someone came to me tonight and they told me that, Richard, if you went to the casino with us tonight and you go out on the town and just have a night of drinking, we would make it possible for you to win enough money that you would have to never lift another finger a day in your life, that you would have money flowing in every day. I would remain poor like I am now because I'm happy. Because for me to have a bunch of money and not know what to do with it, I kill myself. And I'd like to close by saying I love you guys. God loves you. And I thank whoever's responsible for me being up here tonight. I thank you.
I think we got a great talk going on here. Thanks for watching the channel. Taper Dave here. Just curious, do you think this is better than Zoom? Okay, this is how I prepare my drone for launching. I like to do it inside the cab of my truck so I'm not standing outside in the weather. To install the joysticks for control, up and down, right and left, powered on. I have an Android phone that I use to connect it to the drone with. And it's actually controlled through the iPhone, through an app. Oops, wrong way. It's actually controlled through the iPhone, or through this Android phone, through the app. It's actually controlled through the Android phone, through an app, and you connect it through this short connection right here.
Remote control connected.
Remote control's connected. So I pull out the drone. I have to extend the legs. Long legs extended first, then the short legs. Remove the gimbal protector. Set that aside, then power it on one short burst, then one long burst. I lay it down. So I have to go to calibrate. So the drone's not connected yet. It shows you here as this drone gets disconnected, even though the remote's powered on. So the drone has to establish it's connected. So I go into the app to calibration mode. First I'll calibrate the remote controller. Start calibration. Out, in, out, in, up, down, and then this little wheel is to control the gimbal. So it's calibrated. Go to gimbal calibration, start calibration, and then it calibrates the gimbal. I don't know if that shows up. The gimbal's moving all over the place. Changes, you can see it on the video. And I'm calibrated to take off. It's acquired 7 satellites at the moment. There are 26 satellites up in the sky, which it has to acquire before you can take off. So it's connected. It's got enough satellites. This is white. I can go to press this little arrow button, swipe right to take off, and it would start the motors if I slid this to the right. But I'll wait till I get outside. Don't want to do it inside.